The first mistake most people make is believing that disrespect begins with someone else's attitude. It doesn't. Disrespect begins the moment people discover that your standards can be negotiated long before anyone interrupts you, ignores your opinion, or treats you as insignificant. They have already been studying you. Human beings are constantly reading silent signals. They notice what you tolerate, what you forgive, what you excuse, and how desperately you seek acceptance. The frightening truth is this: people rarely disrespect confidence first. They disrespect permission, and permission is usually given without a single word being spoken. Picture a man named Daniel starting his first week at a new company. In his very first meeting, a senior colleague makes a joke at his expense. It stings, but Daniel laughs along. He wants to be liked. A month later, the same colleague hands him extra work at 5 in the evening. Daniel stays late without a word of protest. 6 months in, people interrupt him mid-sentence, borrow his ideas without credit, and volunteer him for tasks nobody else wants. Nobody held a meeting to decide Daniel would be treated this way. He taught them one small surrender at a time. Friedrich Nietzsche built his entire philosophy around one truth: life is driven by the will to power, and power is rooted in perception. Before people challenge your authority, they measure your self-worth. If they sense that your confidence depends on their approval, they know they possess leverage over you. But when they encounter someone who values themselves regardless of outside validation, the game changes. Suddenly, disrespect becomes risky because they no longer control the outcome. This is why self-respect is not simply a personal virtue. It is a strategic weapon. It silently communicates that there are consequences for crossing your boundaries. Not consequences born from anger or revenge, but from your willingness to walk away, withdraw your attention, or remove your presence entirely. People fear losing access to those who refuse to tolerate disrespect, far more than they fear loud displays of aggression. Look carefully at the people who naturally command respect wherever they go. They are not constantly proving themselves. They are not chasing recognition. They often speak less than everyone else, yet when they do speak, people listen. Their behavior tells the room one undeniable truth: my value does not depend on your opinion. That quiet certainty creates psychological pressure. Others become careful, because this person cannot be manipulated through approval, guilt, or intimidation. Human nature rarely protects what comes without conditions. Every time you allow someone to cross a line without responding, you redraw that line farther away. People learn through patterns, not promises. If your actions repeatedly tell them your boundaries are flexible, they stop treating those boundaries as real, not necessarily because they hate you, but because they have learned there is no cost. People admire kindness, but they respect standards. And once you understand that respect starts with the standards you set for yourself, the next step is learning why the most powerful people in any room are almost always the quietest ones in it. Because here is where most people fail. They believe authority comes from speaking more, explaining every decision, winning every argument. In reality, the more desperate you are to be understood, the less powerful you appear. Every unnecessary explanation suggests that you need other people's permission to feel justified, and the moment people sense that need, they know they have influence over you. In 17th century France, King Louis XIV perfected a technique that made the most ambitious men in Europe tremble. Courtiers would spend weeks preparing elaborate requests, rehearsing every argument, anticipating every objection. They would deliver their carefully constructed speeches before the throne, and the king would respond with 3 words: "I shall see." Nothing more. No debate, no explanation, no hint of his leaning. Nobles who commanded armies left that room disarmed, because they had revealed everything and learned nothing. Louis understood what Nietzsche would later put into words: everything profound loves a mask. The person who reveals less holds more. Words are valuable only when they are scarce. The person who speaks endlessly gives everyone access to their thoughts, emotions, and intentions. There is no mystery left. And when people completely understand you, they learn how to predict you. Predictable people are easy to manipulate. Others know exactly which criticisms will provoke you and which compliments will win your approval. Think about someone who feels the need to defend themselves every time they are criticized. Before anyone finishes speaking, they are already explaining their intentions, listing excuses, trying to prove they were misunderstood. Their words may be logical, but psychologically they announce insecurity. Your opinion affects me enough that I must convince you. Now compare that with someone who listens calmly, pauses, and responds only if necessary. Their silence creates uncertainty. The critic starts wondering whether their words landed at all. That uncertainty quietly shifts the balance of power. This is not about becoming cold or refusing to communicate. It is about becoming intentional. Every sentence should have a purpose. Silence also protects you from one of the greatest dangers in human interaction, revealing your weaknesses too early. Every impulsive complaint, every emotional confession, hands others information they may one day use against you. Not everyone has bad intentions, but human nature remembers vulnerability. There is one more effect silence creates. It forces others to fill the empty space. Most people are so uncomfortable with a pause that they start talking, revealing secrets, fears, and motives without realizing it. While they expose themselves, you remain composed, collecting insight. Over time, you understand people far better than they understand you. That imbalance of knowledge naturally commands respect. But words, even carefully chosen ones, are never enough on their own. Because if people discover that your limits exist only in conversation and not in action, they will stop taking both your words and your silence seriously. This is why boundaries are the true test of authority. Every boundary you set sends a message, but every boundary you fail to enforce sends a louder one. One of the greatest illusions is believing that disrespect happens all at once. It rarely does. Consider how it actually unfolds. A woman named Sarah works for months on a project, and in the final meeting, a colleague presents her analysis as his own. She says nothing she doesn't want to seem difficult. 2 weeks later, he borrows another idea. Then he starts speaking over her in meetings. Each incident is slightly bolder than the last, because each silence confirmed the same lesson: there is no cost. Now imagine Sarah had responded differently, not with an outburst, but with a quiet adjustment. She stops sharing her work before meetings. She documents her contributions where everyone can see them. When the colleague asks for her input, she is politely unavailable. No drama, no accusation, just consequences. Within weeks, his behavior changes not because she fought him, but because the access he was exploiting simply disappeared. That is the anatomy of every boundary that actually works. When people cross a small line without consequence, they become curious about where the next line is. Every successful test invites a bigger one. Psychology works through patterns, and the only way to break a pattern is to change what it produces. Nietzsche understood that power is established through consistency. People quickly learn who can be pressured and who cannot. They observe whether your principles change depending on who is standing in front of you. If you are firm only when it is convenient, your boundaries lose credibility. But when your standards remain the same regardless of status or circumstance, people begin adjusting their behavior before they even interact with you. Your reputation starts doing the work your words no longer need to do. Many people fear setting boundaries because they worry others will dislike them, but the desire to be liked often becomes an invitation to be used. Eventually, you find yourself surrounded by people who respect your usefulness, but not your value. Understand the difference between punishment and boundaries. Punishment is driven by emotion. Boundaries are driven by principle. You do not raise your voice or seek revenge. You reduce access, withdraw attention, and if the disrespect continues, you remove yourself entirely. This creates far greater psychological impact than any argument, because it demonstrates that your standards are real. When someone loses access to your time and presence because they crossed a line, they begin to associate disrespect with loss. Human beings remember consequences far longer than they remember conversations. Yet there is a moment when every boundary gets its hardest test, the moment someone deliberately tries to provoke you. And how you handle that moment determines whether all of this power is real or merely an illusion. They criticize you in public. They question your authority. They insult you, hoping to drag you into an emotional reaction. In that moment, your greatest enemy is not the person in front of you. It is your own emotions. The person who controls your emotions controls you. 2,000 years ago in Rome, a man struck the Senator Cato across the face in a public bathhouse, a humiliation in front of everyone. When the man later realized who he had hit and came to beg forgiveness, Cato replied with a single sentence, "I don't remember being struck." He refused to even acknowledge that the insult had reached him. With those 5 words, he erased the entire event. The attacker was left holding an offense that his target simply declined to receive. Rome never forgot the man who could not be provoked. That is the level of composure that makes people cautious. Nietzsche warned that whoever cannot command himself will forever be commanded by others. Emotional reactions cloud judgment. Anger, frustration, and wounded pride create blind spots that intelligent opponents exploit. If a single insult can make you lose your composure, people have discovered your weakness. They no longer need strategy. They simply press the same trigger whenever they want to control you. Every outburst becomes evidence that your behavior can be steered from the outside. This is why truly powerful people rarely react immediately. Every emotional response leaks information. Anger exposes your insecurities. Defensiveness exposes your fears. Desperation exposes your dependence on approval. The calmer you remain, the less ammunition you provide. Picture 2 people facing the same public insult. The first instantly argues, raises his voice, and spends 10 minutes proving the other person wrong. Everyone watching remembers one thing: who lost control. The second person listens without interrupting, pauses, and either offers a few calm words or says nothing at all. The attention shifts away from the insult and toward the person who refused to be shaken. Instead of looking weak, they appear impossible to manipulate. This does not mean suppressing your emotions or pretending they don't exist. Every human being feels anger and frustration. The difference is what happens between feeling and acting. Powerful people create space between the two, a pause that lets emotions settle before decisions are made. That short pause prevents mistakes that emotional people spend years trying to repair. There is a deeper reason emotional control commands respect. It breaks people's predictions. Most people expect anger after an insult, panic under pressure, fear when challenged. When you refuse to react as expected, you introduce uncertainty, and uncertainty makes people cautious. They begin wondering what you are thinking, what your next move is, and whether provoking you was a mistake. People don't fear the loudest person in the room. They fear the one who cannot be emotionally controlled. And once your emotions are under your command, there is a quieter force that determines how carefully people treat you, the fear of losing you altogether. Human nature operates on a simple principle. People protect what they fear losing. If your presence is common, your attention unlimited, and your time available to anyone at any moment, people slowly take you for granted. Familiarity without value breeds indifference, and indifference is where disrespect begins. Napoleon understood this instinctively. He observed that if he appeared too often at the theater, the public would stop noticing him, so he rationed his own presence, and every appearance became an event. Nietzsche lived this principle himself. He chose solitude over crowds, and his distance became part of his power. The rare is always valued above the ordinary. The person who is always available is overlooked. The person whose presence must be earned commands attention. Many people believe constant availability makes them important. They answer every message instantly, cancel their own priorities for others, and stay accessible no matter how they are treated. At first, this looks generous, but over time, people begin expecting it instead of appreciating it. What was once kindness becomes obligation, and the first time you fail to deliver, the same people who benefited from your availability turn resentful, not because you did something wrong, but because they had grown accustomed to unlimited access. Look at those who hold real influence. They are not impossible to reach because they are arrogant. They are selective because they understand the value of focus. Their attention is invested where it matters. That selectiveness creates an invisible effect. Others begin valuing every interaction because they know it is not freely given. But scarcity alone is not enough. The deepest source of value is what you actually bring. Skills, knowledge, discipline, and reliability are assets that cannot be easily replaced. People may disrespect empty titles, but they hesitate to disrespect genuine competence. Deep down, they understand that someone who consistently creates value has options. And people with options are never easily controlled. This is also why the willingness to walk away is so powerful. Many people stay in draining friendships, jobs, and relationships because they fear being alone, and others can sense it. When people believe you have nowhere else to go, they know you will stay no matter how you are treated. But the moment they understand you would rather leave than accept disrespect, the balance of power shifts. Suddenly, they are the ones afraid of losing something valuable. None of this requires manipulation or arrogance. It is about building a life so full of purpose that you are no longer desperate for anyone's validation. Ironically, the less you chase people's attention, the more they willingly give it. The most respected people are rarely those who demand importance. They are the ones whose absence is felt the moment they leave. Yet all of these principles, the standards, the silence, the boundaries, the composure, the value, will mean nothing if they remain ideas instead of habits. Because in the end, people don't judge you by what you claim to believe. They judge you by what you repeatedly do. Your reputation is not created by your intentions. It is created by your patterns, and once established, your reputation speaks before you ever enter the room. Nietzsche understood this timeless reality. People trust patterns more than promises. Anyone can claim to be confident. Anyone can talk about loyalty, discipline, or strength. But words dissolve the moment reality contradicts them. If people repeatedly watch you abandon your standards under pressure, your reputation forms around that weakness. If they consistently see you hold your principles even when it costs you something, your reputation forms around that strength. Eventually, people stop questioning who you are. Your actions have already answered. Think of that one person in every workplace, every family, every friend group, whom nobody tests anymore. Newcomers are quietly warned, don't bother playing games with her, it won't work. Nobody remembers a single dramatic confrontation that earned this. There wasn't one. There were only years of small, consistent decisions, promises kept, lines held, composure maintained. Hundreds of unremarkable moments compounded into something remarkable, a reputation that now protects her without her lifting a finger. Most people are predictable only in their inconsistency. Confident when things go well, insecure when challenged. Firm with some people, submissive with others, disciplined in words, careless in action. This inconsistency creates doubt, and where doubt exists, respect fades. People naturally test those whose behavior changes with convenience because they sense uncertainty underneath. This is also the difference between image and character. An image depends on what people think today. Character determines what they will think tomorrow. You can spend years managing appearances, and a single moment of weak character will destroy the illusion. Real influence is built differently through hundreds of small decisions that align with your values until those decisions become your identity. The psychology behind this is simple. Human beings rely on past experience to predict future behavior. If someone has consistently shown discipline and integrity, people expect it to continue, and they hesitate before acting disrespectfully, because experience has already taught them there will be consequences. Calm, predictable consequences, driven by principle. That expectation changes behavior before conflict even begins. The strongest people rarely need to defend themselves. Their reputation does it for them. In the end, making people fear disrespecting you was never about intimidation or aggression. It is about becoming the kind of person whose self-respect is unwavering, whose words carry weight, whose boundaries are consistent, whose emotions remain under control, whose value is undeniable, and whose actions have built a reputation louder than any argument. Once you reach that point, respect is no longer something you chase. It becomes something people choose to give because your character leaves them no reason to do otherwise.